I must have been 10 or 11. I was watching Revenge of the Nerds with my dad.
It sounds like it's cute, but the dangers would be if something bad happens.
I said, Mom, what's a boner? It's when a man's penis gets hard.
It's going to be invalid because the names are not the proper names. Condoms don't matter there.
Doing all this heavy breathing and sweating and then no pleasure. It's like, huh?
Hi, Tanya. How are you today?
I'm good, Erin. How are you?
Pretty good. It's a great weekend so far.
It's beautiful outside.
It sure is.
Texas May weather.
Yep.
It's actually not as hot as it usually is, which
Yeah,
is
I was
nice.
noticing that. That rain that we had last week, it was like cold and rainy, which is very unusual in of itself. To put cold and rainy in
May.
Texas.
It's like, huh?
Well, right before we logged on, we were talking about some different topics, and I think today we're going to cover some of the interesting articles that we're reading. A lot of the articles that I'm coming across are talking about STI treatments. So we may talk about that, give our opinions about it. One of the ones that stood out was about how to talk to your teens about sex. And so we can address that. And then there's one on penis size, another one on AI. And we have to read all of this stuff so that we can make sure we're keeping up with where society is and where the research is and all of that kind of stuff.
That's right. It's and definitely different today than in the past. I think in the past, right, it just wasn't talked about much at all.
Yeah.
And I think parents now want to have those conversations because they grew up not having the conversations and had to face certain situations that perhaps made them second think about whether they made the right decision. Did they they're like, I don't want my child to have to go through what I did. That seems to be the pattern with generations, right? And so depending on the age too, how do you talk about, what language do you use, where what do they understand, when they're, say, 3 years old versus up to 5 years old. Then pre-puberty, when that starts coming in. I mean, there's just definitely different ways of having the conversation, versus I like to think about, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I must have been 10 or 11. I was watching Revenge of the Nerds with my dad. And there's a part in the movie where one of the nerds guys says, if this was a dream, I'd have a boner. And I was, 10 or 11, and I said, and I'd never had heard that word before. So I was helping my mom separate the laundry. And I just asked, I said, Mom, what's a boner? And she was like, where did you hear that from? And I said, well, I was watching Revenge of the Nerds, and the guy said if he was dreaming, he would have a boner. I just remember my mom looking at me, and her words, I'll never forget it. She goes, well, it's when a man's penis gets hard. And when she said that, I just remember being embarrassed. Like, I can't believe I even asked that question. But that's around the age when you're more curious about, you start thinking about things. And I just had never heard that word before. So parents, whether you want to have that conversation or not, your child may just flat out ask you some of these things, and
Yeah.
how are you going to respond, right? So
Yes. And one of the articles that I came across is actually from The Conversation. That's a platform that uses pretty straightforward language, not a lot of clinical jargon. And this particular article is entitled 6 Ways to Talk to Your Teens About Sex Without Cringe.
mhm.
And for the most part, parents are comfortable talking about sexuality. And of course, the mothers are more comfortable than the dads. And
Why do
so
you
the
think,
first thing is,
why do you
well,
think that is?
maybe because mothers are the nurturers and they're doing all of the, you know, chit chatting and all of that. The, um,
More of the
yeah,
caretaking?
yes, yeah, that's why I think it would be. So the first tip is, you kind of brought this out earlier. Start talking to your kids when they're young, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sex talk. It's just age appropriate talk about, you know, their bodies and the basics of reproduction, just like you would have conversations with them about animals and reproduction. And you just use what's age appropriate. And so the earlier you have those conversations, then it's not that awkward
Mhm.
as the child gets older, and then they'll feel comfortable coming to you, you know, coming to the parent and saying, you know, asking the questions, and then finding opportunities to talk about sex stuff, you know, like if
Mhm.
some, like what you brought up, you heard something or saw something in a movie and you asked your parent a question. And so
Mhm.
that was a good learning moment. And that's what parents should do, find learning opportunities to have those kind of conversations, because apparently you felt comfortable enough talking to your mom, asking her that question.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest faux pas is telling kids what not to do. You know, don't have sex and abstinence and all of that.
Yeah.
Don't watch porn and don't do this. That's not a good way to have these kind of conversations, because, you know, they're going to be curious about it, and you're bringing negative into something that should be very positive as they're getting
Mhm.
older. And
Yeah,
you
at least yes.
definitely tell stories about yourself. Um, you know, nothing graphic, but part of it is to normalize it, you
Mhm.
know, and to show, you know, I'm listening to you. I know that you're trusting me with this very, you know, this could be an embarrassing topic. And so making yourself human is a good idea.
Very true.
Yeah.
Because the teenager or young, adolescents will, I mean, they can tell when we are not comfortable
Hmm.
having a conversation, and that is like an immediate. If you're uncomfortable, they, you're their parent, and they're like, especially if they really are wanting to do what follow your lead, and they're like, if you don't want to talk about it, then I don't want to talk about it. They're
Hmm.
usually going to follow that. It's rare that a child will say, continue to push. Like, had my mom had said, oh, that's not a good word, I probably
Hmm.
would have just dropped it myself and maybe figured out other ways to, you know, back then it wasn't, I guess there was Google and stuff, but not as
Usually you
accessible.
ask friends. Like
Yeah.
if the kids are going to, at that age when they're teenagers, they're going to be talking to their
Oh, yeah.
peers about things, and their peers are going to be getting their information from all over the place. And so either the parent should be doing that, you know, that's a role of a parent, unless you want your kids to get all kinds of information that's inaccurate or dangerous, or they're not learning anything about consent. I think that's one of the main things to teach kids about consent, and not necessarily about sexual consent, but all kinds of boundaries, you know, about touching other people and saying things to people that are inappropriate, because they're all violations of boundaries. So I
Yeah,
think consent can start at a very, very early age.
I agree. um, because we each have our body, and even a little person, very young, um, has the right to not have others violate that boundary. So
I brought that up to parents too. Like if you're teaching your kids, as babies, how you teach your babies their body parts. And then when you get to the genitals and you make up these weird names for the genitals,
yeah,
like
the front butt.
this is your head and this is your eyes and this is your nose and this is your cookie. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, and so it sounds like it's cute,
Yeah,
but the dangers of that would be if something bad happens, like if somebody violates their boundaries and then they're trying to talk to child protective services or law enforcement or anybody about that, it's going to be invalid because the names are not the proper names for
yeah,
whatever is happening. And
right,
so, and then you're not, and you're by misnaming the body parts, you're going into that conversation with some kind of shame associated with the
right.
body.
Yeah, it can't be talk. Don't talk, like, kind of
Yeah,
into that realm of don't say it, don't talk about it.
right.
Even though they're trying to have the conversation, it's still taboo, and it, shouldn't be discussed in that way.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, so, what do you think is the hardest or most difficult part of discussing, say, sexual health or STIs with, is it, say, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, or do you think it's kind of equally? I feel like the real little ones are, they haven't quite yet developed embarrassment, right?
Right. Right.
You can describe things and explain to them at their level of understanding.
Hmm.
And they'll just, okay, not think anything about it. I feel
Right.
like that middle school age is a little bit, they start to develop, comparing themselves to others, and they're more embarrassed over things. To
Yes.
me, that's the harder age group to have the conversations with, because it's like an immediate eye roll, like, oh, my parent wants to talk about this and I don't want to talk about it, which to me
Yes.
seems like the most important time to have that conversation,
I
is
agree.
that
And
age.
then and that age group, like the preteen, when
Mhm.
the body is changing and they smell, and so they need to take showers. They should have been taking showers to begin with, but like they need to wear deodorant and that kind of thing. And so sometimes they don't notice that, like when they're 5, 6, and 7, like you don't, nobody is telling you anything about that. But as you get older, like you smell bad, and then the kids at school talk about you and all of
Mhm.
that. And so that's part of it too, like having all of these difficult conversations when they're preteen,
Right.
or making the whole hygiene thing early on in their childhood. You take a bath so that your body is clean, and so they can make that connection, like even when they become preteens. And then you talk about deodorant, and then when the little girls start their periods, like all of
Yeah.
these conversations have to take place long before the moment arrives,
Yeah.
and you just normalize it. I just encourage parents to normalize it as much as possible, and even do things like uh, groups, with other parents, and kids that are a certain age. Like, what if you have like a group of parents and one of them is a nurse or one of them is a teacher, and you want to, get together some kind of little plan on how to educate the children. I think that's a good idea, because then if everybody's there, it's a shared experience and nobody
Yeah,
has to feel embarrassed about it.
for sure. And by that age group, if you have had some fundamental foundational conversations about body parts. And you know, this is not, it shouldn't be uncomfortable when they're, you know, preteen. I mean, they're still going to have preteen thoughts and behaviors, but it's not going to be completely just out of nowhere. They're going to have some idea of already, right? Like you said, they're already talking to their friends, they're observing, they're curious. It's a great time to talk about, you know, what is the safe options for sex, because that's right there in that age range of, you know, the first times people start thinking about that. It's like 15 to 17, but you want to have the conversation before that. What safe options are, what does a healthy relationship consist of, right? Something, you know, you don't want your child to go out dating a controlling or, you know, any of the negative aspects. Somebody, yeah, I mean, you know, that's a very pivotal moment where they start to have more serious behaviors and thoughts with whomever they have crushes on or are attracted to. And so, you know, I think the parents that are embarrassed that I see are the ones that never had the conversation. They just never discussed it beforehand. They themselves may not be comfortable because of how they, you know, they grew up. Maybe they never had the discussion. Then they just think, I don't want to have that. Oh, the school will take care of it. Yeah, the school, there's all these external areas to get information, but it's important that you have the discussion with your child, so y'all are on the same page of you know, what you would like to relay to them, because they're going to get information from everybody else too.
And there's a difference between moralizing sexuality, like bringing religion into it, versus just what are the birds and the bees, just the facts, you know, about consent. You know, that has nothing to do with religion. Like you that just has to exist if you're part of a society, you know, living amongst people. But just having those kind of conversations, and just because your child is less likely to get themselves in trouble sexually if they know about condoms, if they know about all of the safer sex practices and all of that. They're less likely to get out there and do things that you don't want them to do. And so it's a misconception that having the conversations encourages kids to get out there and be sexual, and that's not true at all.
Yeah. And you know right, because the reason we discuss safe contraceptions or what contraceptions are is because there does exist certain STIs that, you know, can be contracted if that you're not safe. And so, you know, these are things these are things that not every, you know, preteen has had the, you know, they might have seen some sort of pornographic image or video. Those aren't talking about STIs. You know, if you do this, there's also the possibility of these happening. Do you even know what they are? Which ones are treatable, curable? Which ones are you have to maintain for the rest of your life?
And which ones you get above the neck, because condoms don't matter there. And so then you have other decisions to make about the kind of contact that you're going to have with people, because that's something that isn't discussed a lot. You know, you can get gonorrhea anywhere. or syphilis or chlamydia. Like you can get these things anywhere. And
Mhm.
so being real with teenagers about what is considered sexual activity, like use the whole umbrella, the sexual activity, the contact, all of that, and just be real with them.
Yeah. Yeah, because so many times young people don't, it's something that, right, prefrontal cortex not developed. They don't have the years of experience that an adult has, to say, oh, this is a possibility if I'm not safe. And
Mhm.
they will go through life and learn by what happens to them. And if
Right.
you can prevent some of that, or at least give them the knowledge of, hey, this is a possibility. Are you aware of that? It you know it does make you think a little
Mhm.
bit about, hey, I don't want, you know an HPV virus or an HSV virus. I mean, these are things that you end up carrying
Mhm.
for the rest of your life. And um, that definitely makes people stop and think, hey, is this something that I want to I want to be involved in if I'm not ready, right? If I'm halfway, I have a crush on someone and they just, we just really want to see what this is about. Is that worth it, right? I mean, they may not have those thoughts. An adult does, and which is why the adult should be the one to have these. What do you know? What do you understand? Because I guarantee you, what you as an adult knows, or a parent, what your preteen knows are not the same.
Right.
Um,
It's
and
generational differences and all of that.
Mhm.
Um, one of the options, besides some of the stuff that we've talked about, ways to kind of get into the topic of sexuality with your kids, you can also look on legitimate websites, like Planned Parenthood and whatever the school is offering,
Mhm.
because at least you're going to get some baseline stuff and they're going to talk about how to do it from a developmentally appropriate age.
Mhm.
Um, I would also recommend having the pediatrician or someone in the one of the nurses or whoever in the child's doctor's office to have that kind of conversation with them, because
Mhm.
then they can see it, they'll understand it well if it's coming from a medical perspective. And
It's not just
then
your dad.
right, right. And then I've actually had parents reach out to me, and then I do a family session with the teen and the parent and talk about sexuality and just using my credentials to do that. And that helps to alleviate some of the discomfort. And I'm backing up whatever the parents have in place, and it usually ends up being a really good experience. You just do one
Mhm.
or two sessions, and then it's like I'm um, modeling the behavior, on how to have the conversation with the team. And all of the times that I've done that, it's worked out really, really well. So having a
Mhm.
professional to do it can ease some of the discomfort.
Right, of course. Um, and again, some of these um, issues that parents struggle with when their child is of that age, that's already having some, is curious about what all of this is, and is having these feelings and going through hormonal changes. Um, if you took the time when they were much younger, they wouldn't have there wouldn't be as much mystery over it.
Right.
And that feeling of uncomfortable for both you and your child, or the young adult or young adolescent, that would have been lessened had some of those conversations been had at that developmentally appropriate level. um
I agree. And then owning it, like being honest. If you feel uncomfortable with it, say that
Yeah.
to your child. Just say, well, this is kind of uncomfortable for me because when I was your age, this is how it was handled. And so I want to do that better this time because I don't want this to be an uncomfortable conversation for us. So
Yeah.
even putting it out there, just like if you're getting ready to do public speaking and you're nervous, get out there and tell everybody that you're nervous. And
Yeah.
then you're automatically not nervous
Yeah.
because it's relatable, like being real with people, being human with people,
Yeah.
including your kids.
And an openness to what, I mean, again, we can't right? We see people, parents are having issues with, behavioral issues with their child. And you hear the parent has a very defined, structured, you need to be this in within these lines. Anything outside of that is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
This very rigid, black and white, less open to others' options and perspectives and likes. And so if you think about it from that, also from that perspective, that's a more interpersonal interaction, right, with with others. If your parent is completely, you know there's no outside coloring outside the lines, that is going to create some closed off, not wanting to have a conversation. The child is not going to feel comfortable. It's because they're going to feel everything that they say is wrong or inappropriate or not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And we know as mental health providers that, you know, everybody is who they are. I mean, we try to help open up those um, thoughts and conversations, make people a little more flexible in how they process things. But um, it's not easy. I mean, people spend their lives, decades, right? Some people, you're talking about parents that have 15-year-olds. These, they've been 4 decades, 5 decades, and probably being the person that they are and haven't thought about why they need to think if you know it's something that can be adjusted or looked at differently. And that's going to create its own set of psychological effects.
Right.
And again, counseling. I mean, maybe the whole individual counseling for parents, for the teen, for family sessions. I mean, all of that might be needed because
Yeah.
it can be one person who wants the entire family to just follow what they say. I mean, I've seen that many times, and everybody's walking on eggshells around this one person because they don't want to deal with whatever repercussions there are, shaming,
Mm-hmm.
criticism. And
That's where the moralizing comes in. And I don't
yeah.
think that's appropriate because that's two different things.
Mhm.
It's different than, if you're trying to just teach the facts, the science, the birds and the bees, what's, developmentally appropriate and psychologically appropriate at each time versus making it about what your religious beliefs are. That is, they're completely different things. And religion is very abstract anyway. And so trying to fit that into what you're teaching a 5 or 6 year old, I think it's absurd. And
Yeah.
it's just not realistic to try to, because when you're 5, like it's everything is black and white. Everything is about, it's very concrete. And
Yeah.
then so the religion thing, that should be on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I don't want to like bash religion or anything,
Right.
but I think that should be age appropriate too, introducing that kind of stuff to kids because they're not able to process any of that, you know? And so telling kids things, you know, adding to, you know, like shame and guilt and embarrassment and like all of that kind of stuff. That's why I just think all of this should be done appropriately and probably bringing in other professionals to assist with it so that you don't cause damage to the kid. You know, they end up anxious and then they can't sexually perform later, or they get into unhealthy relationships, or they're violating people's boundaries and not respecting consent. All of those things that can carry over into adulthood if it's not done properly. So parents, don't feel embarrassed about educating your kids about sex. Just do your research first and just give them the facts and be available to them, you know, because they should be talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are feeling uncomfortable about these conversations and you now have a preteen and you've never had that any type of conversation, there's still resources that you can, you know, get into and there's that's still available, but you know, you don't want your child to turn 18 and then they're, you know, they're legally an adult and they've, you know, you've never had a conversation. You know, if you're one of those parents that never had a conversation, I'd be curious, you know, what their experience and how they view, you know, sexual intimacy and, you know, what has their experience been in life versus those that had the conversations. And you know, the information is out there, but just from like a audience perspective, like, what did you notice? You know, what could have been avoided? What did happen? Or, you know, so on and so forth. That's because that's opening up, allowing for that conversation, those conversations to occur, versus when it doesn't is real important. And if you have these conversations, even with your friends and family members, that you feel comfortable with, I mean, everybody's got an experience in that area, and you know, it's more information gathering. You know, we're here to kind of give you that. Hey, this is what's advised. This is what's helpful. This is what leads to healthy relationships. And you know, there's plenty of other people in your sphere of influence that also have their experiences. And so
and pay attention to what the schools are doing. You know, a lot of what the schools do, it's appropriate because they put it in scientific terms, like they're educating kids that way. But you know, I would ask parents to make sure that the schools are not taking over something that really should be the parents' role, and make sure that the schools are not moralizing sexuality, because, you know, schools are doing things like that, you know, putting the 10 Commandments up and, you know, things like that. And so there's no place in that, you know, when you're just trying to parent your kid, just parent your kid and then contact professionals that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, you know, pediatricians and mental health and social workers, to assist in that.
yeah,
Because we're trying to make this where it's not complicated because it has become complicated a little bit. We're trying to simplify it as much as possible and encourage parents to just be parents.
yeah, it's a hot, I mean, it's definitely a hot topic in these last, you know, few years. You know, again, if you this is something that you're struggling with, there not every counselor is going to be a fit for you. But we hope that the end result is a healthier perspective of what sex is and safe practices are.
Yes.
And because it's going to happen.
Hmm.
And so and a part of that, right, the pleasure of it,
Yes.
you know, that's a whole, we could have a whole other episode on that, but
And we'll bring
and
that
it's a
up too.
component of it, that should be discussed, because
Because it's a
what are,
fact.
what are we doing, right? We're doing all this heavy breathing and sweating and then no pleasure. It's like, huh?
Mhm. But
um
kids are, we'll get into this in a different episode, but uh, I mean, kids feel pleasure too with different things. Like when you take the diaper off of a baby, they touch their genitals. They do.
yeah.
They learn how to do that, and they learn how to do lots of things that feel good to them. And so that's why you just have conversations about, what's okay, you know, about how they touch their bodies and, that kind of thing. Like, well, you can't do it, in the middle of HEB, but you can go in your room,
Yeah.
like,
Every
that kind of
single,
thing.
every single person, if you thought about it, you remember those moments in your own life where that occurred at a very young age.
Yeah.
um I don't care where you live, where you grew up, every single human remembers when they started to realize, oh, this, you know,
This feels good.
yeah, yeah, this feels good. Um, and so, it's a biological effect and desire that people have. And
Hmm.
so if you are, you know, lacking in that area, you're not having a fulfilling experience, um, that's also why we exist, right? As therapists that work, or mental health professionals that work in this field. So, um,
Well,
yeah.
this was good. This was
Mhm.
good. And we'll go deeper into this because there are a couple of elements, of this being able to talk to your kids as parents, things that can, like the negative effects, like if you don't do that, what could happen, like I mentioned earlier about, anxiety getting into relationships and performance anxiety and, having negative thoughts about your body image and those types of things. So those are carryovers, and we don't want that to happen. So anyway, we're trying to nip it all in the bud. So this is good.
Yeah.